Welcome to Scotch Plains, New Jersey. This is Comcast Cable, Channel 34, Scotch Plains Television. Your town, your TV.
Hi, this is Kara Shovlin. Tonight I'm here at the Westfield Community Players, and I'm here with Channel 34, Scotch Plains TV, to celebrate the world's premiere of Two Lords and a Lady, which is the amazing story of Aunt Betty Frazee and the historic Battle of the Short Hills. This is a John Fazio film, and it's inspired by the Aunt Betty Frazee project, which is the renovation of the Frazee house in Scotch Plains. So we're going to talk to some moviegoers and see what's going on, find out a little bit about the movie and what's going on here tonight. Okay, I'm talking to Wendy Fazio, who is the wife of the director of the film. Now, can you just tell me a little bit about the film, whatever, just some information about it?
It's a film about the confrontation between Aunt Betty Frazee. Actually, Betty Frazee was known as Aunt. It's a long story. You'll see it in the film. But she confronted the British General Lord Cornwallis and General Howe right after the Battle of Short Hills. It was a crushing defeat for the Continental Army. But they approached her on an afternoon, after the battle, when she was baking bread, and they asked her for a loaf of bread for the defeat of their army, and she was baking it for the Continental Army, and she did offer to give them bread, but she said, "I give this to you in fear, not in love," and they graciously declined. So that's this whole story. She became a legend, always has been a legend. Her house still exists, which is in terrible state right now. Very neglected, very rump-sprung. And we're trying to, the Rotary Club is trying to get funding to resurrect it. And it shall be done. And this is all part of it. This is just a labor of love to try to draw some interest and get some local monies together to establish it as not only to resurrect the house, but to also take the land around it and develop a park and also a conference, the house to be used as a conference center, educational center, all that kind of thing.
Terrific. Now, what inspired your husband to make the movie?
He's always had a love for film, and he's always had a love for history. And the script was written by Frank Thorne, who happens to be my father. And my father and my husband have a wonderful relationship, and they kind of collaborated on it. And they've just been having lots of fun doing it. Everybody volunteered. It's nobody got paid a penny. It's all the actors volunteered. We had one mayor and one former mayor of Scotch Plains and Fanwood. They're as General Howe and Lord Cornwallis, and it's been just a wonderful effort.
That's terrific. So it really is a labor of love. So that's the connection between the director and the screenwriter. So I get it now. I get it. Very, very cool. All right, now I'm here speaking with the screenwriter, Frank Thorne, longtime resident of Scotch Plains, right?
53 years.
Wow. Now, I just spoke to your daughter, yes? And who is also the husband of the director. So now I'm getting the connection. Very cool.
Correct.
So why don't you tell me a little bit about the screenplay and how you came up with it and its history?
Well, it started in September of 2004. I had dinner with our dentist, who is now retired. Can you imagine being friendly with your dentist, that after he retires you take him out to dinner? And he mentioned the fact that the Rotary was going to, had taken on the project to restore the Frazee house. And I had written the illustrated history of Union County, and I had a section in there on Aunt Betty, so I knew all about Aunt Betty. And so I immediately wanted to be involved, and from that I conceived the idea of doing a documentary about Aunt Betty, feeling that it would be an excellent tool to raise funds and also to pass on the heritage to the younger generation. We had test screened this before a group of Girl Scouts. We did a lot of test screening before historical groups, and of course they were acquainted, but these were 9 to 12-year-old girls And before we started, I said, any of you heard of Aunt Betty? None of them had, but when we finished, they knew all about Aunt Betty, and she's our local hero. She's going to be the next Molly Pitcher. She's going to be up there with Molly Pitcher. It's the best fun I have ever had in my life. I'm a cartoonist, but the film production is absolutely fascinated me. And there's Dick Dobbins right there.
So this is outside of your, like you said, you were a cartoonist. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I've never had a job. I've drawn cartoons for my entire life, and I started out with the Illustrated History of Union County, which is just published, and my royalties from that will go to support the restoration of the house, of the Frazee house. Viva Aunt Betty! Now, anyway, I've done all newspaper strips, comic strips, Flash Gordon, Jungle Jim, on through Sergeant Rock, and for many years I've been contributing to Playboy, and one of my creations was made into a film, Red Sonja, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger and Bridget Nielsen. And do you see that film? All right, yes. It's a miracle, that film, I tell you. Any film that makes it into general theatrical release is a miracle. But this is even more fun for me because in the making of the Red Sonja movie, I was not involved. But this one I was hands-on, and the involvement, casting the characters, getting the two mayors of Fanwood and Scotch Plains to portray the two generals. And that gave us a kind of a political connection, a little clout there, which helped out. And the media just love Aunt Betty. I mean, she's fabulous. When they started, they wanted to call it the Elizabeth Frazee, Restoration Fund. And I said, wait a minute, because I knew about it. I said, Aunt Betty, you got Aunt Betty. I mean, this is Mary Worth. I mean, this is apple pie. I mean, this is going to be, and so there was some opposition, but I think it proved that my judgment was correct, because everybody loves the idea of Aunt Betty.
Okay, now I'm speaking with Joe Cudum, who is a member of the Rotary Club. Now tell me a little bit about your involvement with the Rotary Club and the project here.
I'll be glad to. I've been a member of the Fanwood Scotch Plains Rotary Club for the last 36 years. I'm very happy and proud. I'm a past president of the club, and at present time I'm a public relation chair for the club. I'm really excited about the project that the Rotary Club does for the community, for the school with the scholarships, for the community in helping different organizations with financing to help them out. And what we're saying is that the Fanwood Scotch Plains Rotary Club is a service club, helping the community. So we would like for those who are not members to consider becoming members and come. We meet at Snuppy's restaurant, and it's nice to come. We meet on Wednesdays at noon for lunch, and any person interested in coming, just come over at noon on Wednesday and be our guest for the first time, and then know about the Rotary Club. We need more members to help the community more and more.
Excellent. Now tell me about the Aunt Betty Frazee project and what the Rotary Club is doing around that.
Well, the Frazee Club, Frazee Building Program is really the best activity that the club is having. It's a project that International Rotary Club asked each club to come out with a project that would make a big impact on the community. And it was suggested that the Frazee House to be remodeled, and the history of it is really fantastic for people to know about its history from way back in history, to come and join and support the community. The project is going to cost lots of dollars to rebuild. So we need community support, and we need people to know more and more about the Frazee House. And of course, the Rotary Club has the brochures and flyers and information on how people can come and help, or people can come and contribute, or people come and ask questions.
For the confusion on the time. Some people thought it was at 7, but it was always meant to be at 8, so we're going to begin on time. My name is Pat Plant. I'm a Rotarian, and I'm also the president of the Fanwood Scotch Plains Rotary Frazee House Incorporated. A couple of housekeeping things. Please steer clear of the fire exits to your left and to your right, except, of course, the generals who are guarding the door. And if you have cell phones, please turn them off, turn them down, so that they don't interfere with this wonderful production we're going to watch tonight. Welcome to the third premiere of Two Lords and a Lady, the story of Aunt Betty Frazee and the historic Battle of the Short Hills that was fought in Scotch Plains in June of 1777. Again, my name is Pat Plant. I'm a member of the Rotary Club. And 2005 marked a centennial year for Rotary International. It was decided that each Rotary Club would select a life-sustaining project for their community, and the Fanwood Scotch Plains Rotary Club selected the restoration of the Frazee House, which is at the intersection of Terrell and Raritan Roads in Scotch Plains. We then created an offshoot known as the Fanwood Scotch Plains Rotary Frazee House Incorporated. Tonight we have the pleasure of viewing these events of that day through a film produced and directed by John Fazio of Fazio Productions in Rotary. And I'm sure there's a few creative bits in there from Frank Thorne. Star is Hope Weinstein, who is right here. Hope portrays Aunt Betty Frazee. We have Mayor Martin Marks of Scotch Plains as Lord Charles Ford. And former Fanwood Mayor Lou Jung as Lord William Howe. Also included in the film is Tom Sherry as Gershom, Betty's husband, and Mike Sherry as Gershom's nephew. We'd like to thank Linda and John Carell, who together with the Westfield Community Theater are our hosts this evening. Tonight Tonight is an opportunity to learn more about these events of that day and the history of this area, and to learn more about this project and make a contribution or a donation to ensure its success. Without any further ado, I'd like to present our director-producer, John Fazio.
I just want to push the play button, really. We can talk about this later, okay? Because I think we've waited long enough.
We're in the studio of Fanwood artist Alan Schaefer. Mr. Schaefer has graciously agreed to paint the portrait of our legendary hometown heroine, Aunt Betty Frazee. There is no known existing record or image of how Elizabeth Lee Frazee looked in her lifetime, so we turn to the master artist's imagination, his canvas, and his palette of colors. If you're from this corner of Union County, chances are you've heard of Aunt Betty Frazee, the courageous young baker who served the needs of her rural farm community over 200 years ago, when the original 13 colonies, strung like a ribbon along the eastern seaboard, were determined to free themselves from British rule. Gershom, Betty's husband, was a builder of barns and houses and a master cabinet maker. Many examples of his craftsmanship survive to this day and are prized collector's items. Betty and Gershom had no children of their own, but had many nephews and nieces. Throughout her long life, Elizabeth was addressed by family and friends affectionately as Aunt Betty. Now we'll gather Aunt Betty from her time. We're traveling along Lampert's Mill Road. That's Raritan Road up ahead. We'll turn there and visit some of the beautifully restored homes that date back to the 18th century. That's the DeCamp House coming up on the right. It's a gem of farmhouse Georgian architecture, kept in a miraculous state of preservation. Like many buildings of the era, the house is composed of two structures joined together. The older part was built by John DeCamp in 1735. That's the year Paul Revere was born. The DeCamp farm property was a sizable area of grazing and tillable land, but it was small in comparison to the sprawling plantations that dominated the landscape nearer to Old Elizabethtown, now called Elizabeth. Slavery was practiced in Betty's time. In fact, there was a slave market that prospered at Old Elizabethtown Point in colonial times. All of the DeCamp property has long since been divided and homes have replaced the farmland. To grasp the breadth of the DeCamp acreage, consider the family cemetery. It still exists, and it's near a quarter of a mile from the house. The plot is on Lampert's Mill Road on the corner property of 2160 Buttonwood Lane. The original gravestones are still standing. Here is the final resting place of John, Deborah, Dr. Gideon, Freelove, and Morris DeCamp. During the Revolutionary War, Morris DeCamp fought in Colonel Sheldon's Light Dragoons. Freelove DeCamp Dunham died in 1758 at the age of 26. She was mourned by the entire community. Aunt Betty surely attended her funeral. Betty lived to the ripe old age of 77. Continuing down Raritan beyond the DeCamp homestead on the right is the structure of what was the grist mill of the Lampert family. It has since been converted into a well-kept private residence. The water wheel is long gone, but the mill pond is still on Shakamakson Golf Course. The old mill race can be traced to it from behind the house. It was here that the farmers of the 18th and 19th centuries brought their grain to be milled. Aunt Betty's bread was made from flour ground at the Lampert Mill. A prolific baker, Betty kept 4 barrels of flour and 3 dough troughs on hand to keep her oven busy. Just up the rise from the mill sits the beautifully restored original Lampert homestead. It too is a merger of several houses. The original structure dates back to the pre-Revolutionary era. It was here, after the battle with the Continentals at Ash Swamp in June 1777, that one of 2 columns of redcoats under the command of Lord Cornwallis encamped for the night in the area of the Lampert farm. Behind the house was the Lampert Cider Mill and Distillery. It was famous for its notorious Applejack brandy that the Lamperts distilled from hard cider. The settlers called it Jersey Lightning. One of the hottest days on record had drawn to a close, and not a few of the dehydrated British soldiers helped themselves to the potent brew. Several died during the revel, gone berserk from excessive drink and the oppressive heat. Next morning, the spiteful redcoats seized James Lampert, the founder of the distillery, and continued their advance toward Westfield. They joined with Howe's column and returned to Staten Island, a British stronghold. Lampert was summarily moved to the infamous Sugar House Prison in Lower Manhattan, where he died several months later. A portion of the ill-famed jail, bars and all, can be seen near Police Plaza across from City Hall. Across from the Lampert house is the Littell homestead, circa 1720. This beautifully restored home stands proudly on the corner of Raritan Road and Lake Avenue, known in Aunt Betty's time as the Quaker Road to Rahway. John Littell was the proprietor of a neighborhood tavern on the corner of Raritan and Martine. The tavern, like most homes along their path, was plundered by the redcoat horde in their advance toward Westfield after the battle. Littell's Tavern was a regular stop for the Swift Shore stagecoach line. It was a favorite gathering place for settlers of the colonial period. Aunt Betty, who lived a scant mile up the road, could count on getting the latest reports on the hostilities from patrons of Littell's establishment. The location had been occupied by public houses and inns from the 18th century until the management of the Center for Hope purchased the property several years ago and converted it into office space. On behind the Center for Hope are the fringes of Ash Swamp. The area is an undeveloped county park and the location of what was, in the colonial period, one of the larger Lenape settlements of the region. Let's take a walk in the woods. Ahead is the location of the Lenape settlement. It's called Red Hill. Actually, it's more of a rise than a hill. The name comes from the reddish soil that contains glacial rock that is exceptional materials for making arrowheads and utensils. This is an aerial view of the site. A trail often used by youthful motorbike riders completely encircles Red Hill. The intersection of Raritan and Martine is shown at the top. Raritan runs down on the left, and the Union County Technical Schools are at the lower level. The Lenapes, which translates as original people in their language, were small, self-sufficient groups that had no tribal structure or powerful chiefs. There were estimates that roughly 8,000 Lenapes lived in pre-settlement New Jersey. The men and boys hunted, fished, and did the heavy work, while the women and children gathered wild plant food and gardened. In this region, there are no descendants of these proud original people. They can be found to this day in Ohio, Kansas, and Oklahoma. Many an arrowhead and stone implement has been unearthed in this. Even a mastodon tooth. So far, no dinosaur bones have turned up, but they surely roamed these parts millions of years ago. The Lenape burial grounds are off to the north side of the settlement. The tribes roamed the area for thousands of years before the arrival of the settlers from Elizabethtown and Rahway. We're back heading south on Raritan Road, and approaching on our right is the Sayers-Littell homestead, which dates back to 1750 and hosts a halfway house and well. The cool water refreshed many a traveler from Plainfield to Rahway. The well was just about halfway between the two rural communities. The Union County Technical Schools are on the site of the old Frazee Lee homestead and farm. In the 60s, the house was moved to nearby 11 Black Birch to make room for the schools. The center section was the original structure built in 1764 by Moses Frazee, Aunt Betty's brother-in-law. The homestead of Thomas Lee was added in 1828. It's a beautifully kept house, and the ideal representation of a farmhouse of Aunt Betty's time. Aunt Betty was a Lee, born in Rahway in 1738. In the 1930s, digging to install gas lines along Raritan Road, belt buckles and buttons were unearthed that identified the remains of Hessian soldiers, mercenaries in Cornwallis' massive army. It was so hot that sweltering day in June of 1777 that several died of heat stroke. They were hastily buried in shallow graves along the line of march. Here, where Terrell Road and Raritan conjoin, was known as Two Bridges in Aunt Betty's time. This photo of the Frazee house was taken in the 1870s and gives us a good idea of how Aunt Betty's homestead appeared in her time. As you can see, Raritan Road was little more than an earthen country lane winding its way through sprawling farmlands. If quaint by modern standards, the road was a vital thoroughfare for the settlers in the area. It is here that Betty Frazee's house still stands. In the early part of the last century, the house and tract of land was owned by the Rhino family. Frank and Louise Terry bought the property in the 40s and developed the Terry Lou Acre Zoo. It was a landmark for 45 years until it closed a while back. They claimed it was the largest privately owned zoo in New Jersey. There's the Frazee house as it appeared back in the 1970s. It still looks in good shape. That's Frank Terry walking a llama out to Terrell Road to get their picture taken. The zoo is in the background, where generations of kids came to gaze at a delightful cast of characters, animal, reptile, and avian. Parents brought their children and grandchildren from all over the state. Inner-city kids were routinely bussed in to enjoy a day at the zoo. Some visitors were sight-impaired. They would have the opportunity to run their hands over selected animals' bodies to get an idea of their texture and shape. That's Frank Terry with Dick Coles, the official Terry Lou Zoo photographer. That Bengal tiger was raised from a cub right at the zoo and spent most of his first year inside the Terry house. Over the years, many of the zoo animals were reared right inside the house. Here's Louise Terry nurturing a cub right in the living room. She's holding the same tiger that was poised between Frank and Dick. That's one of the chimps, all dressed up and taking an elephant ride. Now, who could forget the pony rides around the pond or the fun in the monkey house? The old Frazee house is a familiar sight to folks around town. We could only wonder what Aunt Betty would think if she saw the condition of the home she lived in for nearly 60 years.
My eyes deceive me. Look at the old place. It's gone to rack and ruin. The barn is gone along with the wagon shed. And what of the joiner's shop? My beehive oven, gone but for the brick partition. A pity. I baked many a loaf in that oven, not the least of which was requested by a pair of King George's highest-ranking officers. The pair of popinjays were in command of a horde of pillaging lobsterbacks advancing towards the West Fields after the battle along Ash Swamp.
The West Fields was how Westfield was referred to in the 18th century, as with our town, the Scotch Plains. Both were bordering areas of Greater Elizabethtown, which at that time made up most of what is now Union County. The Short Hills in the Scotch Plains area may be confused with the town of Short Hills 10 miles to the north. The Short Hills at Ash Swamp, where the battle took place, are a series of low geological formations that are common to our area. Just prior to the battle, General Washington was staying at his headquarters here at Deacon Drake's house on Front Street in Plainfield. Upon learning of the British advance from Perth Amboy, he and his subordinates moved up to the mountain overlook, near the encampment of the main body of his troops. Washington held the high ground in the redcoats were intent on breaking through the gap in the mountain and attacking the Continentals from behind. It was from this vantage point that General Washington observed the progress of the battle. From here, he could see Perth Amboy to the east and Brunswick and the heights of Princeton and Trenton to the south. In colonial times, the land was cleared for farming and grazing, allowing Washington an approximate view of the troop movements. It was this factor that allowed the sound of the battle, especially the British heavy cannon, to be heard 20 miles away in lower Manhattan.
'Twas late June, and it was sure to be another hot day, so I fired up my oven in the cool of the morning and began baking bread for the Continentals encamped near Ash Swamp. I could hear nearby cannon fire throughout the morning. 'Twas enough to send most of the area's families west to the mountains to be near the protection of General Washington's army. But I stayed at the oven, knowing the bread was needed for the sustenance of our troops. 'Twas past the noon hour when I heard the sound of drums, an unfamiliar tattoo coming from up toward Dog Corners.
Dog Corners? Well, in Aunt Betty's time, there was a dog farm near the corner of Raritan Road and Rahway Road. The canine compound has been gone for nearly 200 years, but the name stuck. Ask an old-timer. He'll direct you to Dog Corners.
Curious, I left the hearth and ventured towards the road. Then along past the apple orchard appeared a pair of horses, each bearing a nobleman of high rank. I was soon to learn that one was his lordship Sir William Howe himself, the highest-ranking British officer in the colonies. A viscount he was, and a descendant of King George I. With him was his compatriot Lord Charles Cornwallis. The king's generals were leading an army of redcoats, 10,000 strong, who marched along sweating like jackbooted swine in the broiling sun. I'd not seen that many Englishmen at one time in all my 39 years. The line stretched back as far as the eye could see. I scurried back to my kitchen as Lord Cornwallis called a halt to the troops. A pair of noblemen dismounted. Up past the well they strutted, with their gold buttons and epaulets gleaming in the afternoon sun. In a thrice I'm standing face to face with their lordships. Cornwallis, oh, and he was a statesman, he was, bows and clears his throat, announcing that he could not help catching the appetizing odors coming from my oven. May it please my lady, he asks, to give one of the king's generals the very next loaf that comes from your oven of baking bread? Soon the bread was ready, and I uneasily complied with the general's request. But as I offered the steaming loaf, I said, "Your lordship will please understand that I give you this bread in fear, and not in love." To my astonishment, he bowed and announced, "Then, my lady, neither I nor any man in my command shall accept a single loaf." The officers returned to their mounts and gave the order to advance towards the west fields. At least Cornwallis was a gentleman, which is more than I can say for the scarlet horde of pillagers he commanded. For no sooner were the generals out of sight, they availed themselves of nearly everything on the property. 3 cows, 23 sheep, the contents of Gersham's joiner's shop, half of our household goods, even the picket fence. It took hours for the column to pass by the farm. On by they paraded like row upon row of crimson clothespins. 'Twas near nightfall when the sound of their drums faded on up past the Lee homestead. but the odor of gunpowder lingered until dawn.
The next time you drive by the entrance to the Ashbrook Golf Course on Raritan Road here on the south side of Scotch Plains, stop and visit the familiar monument to the Battle of the Short Hills. It offers descriptions of the battle, maps, and listings of the patriots who fought in the encounter. That cannon mounted on the top is an excellent replica of an American 8-pounder. Down the road from the battle monument is the historic Terry Well. You'll find it on Raway Road at the corner of Cooper Road. On that scorching afternoon, the parched British troopers drank that well dry. Wearing those wool uniforms surely intensified their discomfort. After the battle, young John Littell found a discarded red coat jacket, and with the conclusion of the hostilities, he used it as a scarecrow in his cornfield. It was said that it stood there intact for over 70 years. The Brits may have lost the war, but they sure could make a durable uniform. The beautifully restored Stagehouse Inn stands on Park Avenue at the center of town in the north side of Scotch Plains. John Sutton built the primary structure in 1737, the year before Betty was born. It was another stop on the Swift Shore stagecoach line. Marquis de Lafayette tarried here when General Washington was at Camp Middlebrook in the Watchungs. Back in the 1950s, the renowned artist Maxwell Stewart Simpson was contracted to paint a mural of the historic confrontation between Betty and the generals. The next time you enjoy a delicious dinner in this superb restaurant, pause in the lobby and examine Simpson's often witty rendition of the celebrated event. Across the street from the inn is the Osborne Cannonball House, which is the headquarters of the Historical Society of Fanwood, Scotch Plains. The structure was built when Aunt Betty was yet in her 20s. In a skirmish during the war, the house was hit by a British 12-pounder. The ball crashed into the house and became lodged between the outer walls. The Osbornes took the incident in patriotic stride. They calmly patched up the hole and had little interest in retrieving the errant missile. 140 years later, in the early 1920s, a construction crew was working in the cellar. While shoring up one of the outer walls, the cannonball was dislodged and rolled unceremoniously onto the cellar floor. Aunt Betty has one more stop to make: the Westfield Presbyterian Church. In her time, it was a simple wooden structure. The day after the battle, the Redcoats, under Howe's command, turned the meeting house into a scene of bloody desecration. They slaughtered plundered livestock in the sanctuary and placed a ram's head on a pulpit. Then they threw down the bell from the belfry and carted it off with them on their return to Staten Island. William Clark, a man from the Westfields, was being held in the Sugar House prison and heard the familiar sound of the bell in the distance. After the war, he reported his discovery, and the bell was joyfully returned to the meeting house. beautifully maintained cemetery is the final resting place for many patriots of Betty's time. It is hallowed ground. Betty visited Gersham's grave for over 24 years. Then, in January 1815, word spread quickly among the residents. Not only of the news that the American forces had defeated the British at the Battle of New Orleans at the close of the War of 1812, but that a revered figure had passed away. Aunt Betty, a unique historical icon of our community, had gone to rest next to her beloved Gershom. Sleep well, Elizabeth Lee Frazee. The Fanwood Scotch Plains Rotary Club is resolved to resurrect the historic Frazee House and make it a focus of 18th century memorabilia and demonstrations of daily life in Aunt Betty's time. It will be open to public meetings, arts and craft shows, and community events. The surrounding property will be a passive park with plenty of space for picnics and township gatherings. Eventually, the barn, carpenter shop, and other outbuildings will be added. In time, the Frazee property will become a working farm again. How wonderful it will be to once again taste vegetables grown from Frazee soil.
who was our star. And Mayor of Scotch Plains, Marty Marks. Has Betty's heart in it, I think. And really to all the Rotarians and the committee members who have done so much to help with these events, and certainly a special acknowledgement to our director here. And Dick Dobbins, are you here with us? I just can't see anything. Dick Dobbins would like to make a special presentation. Dick Dobbins.
My goodness. Is that a bowling trophy? I'm just going to put this here for, oh, you can hold. Okay.
Easy for you to say.
The coveted Pauly Award is the most prestigious citation to be given for excellence in the advancement of America's historical heritage. The gold statuette depicting Paul Revere during his famous and heroic ride is emblematic of the recipient's passion to furthering our cultural legacy. The Fanwood Scotch Plains Rotary Club can think of no person more qualified, more worthy to receive this award than the director and cinematographer of the fabulous documentary you've just witnessed, John. John, it's difficult to imagine the time and effort that went into the production of this inspired piece of work. The Rotary Club cannot thank you enough for this magnificent film that will make everyone who sees it aware of our project to restore the Frazee House for the people of our community. You're a very special and gifted person. How lucky we are to have found you. Thanks again, John.
This is excellent. I'm totally taken by surprise.
Okay, fresh out of the film experience, it was fabulous, and I'm here speaking with John Fazio, producer, director, filmmaker, the whole thing. Tell me about it.
Well, it was a long project, about 2 years, and it started out as flat art. Most of it, 90% was flat art, and I had the idea to bring it into live action. So we had a contest to get our actors and actresses, and we got the voiceover people, and we found locations, and we had to do this for no money. But since I have a studio and I have equipment, we did it.
Turned out great. That was really amazing. I really enjoyed it. I learned so much about the area that I grew up in. I was born here, and there was so much of that I didn't know. So that was a really great history lesson.
Did you like the music?
I did. I loved the music. It was great.
Yeah, very good.
Now, tell me about the award.
Well, I was totally taken by surprise. Apparently, this is a very coveted award, and I was totally in shock. It looked like a bowling thing to me. I don't know.
So who's it from? And this is Paul Revere, right?
This is Paul Revere, and it's from the, I guess, from the Cultural Society, bunch of people. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, I'm nervous. I can't talk anymore.
Okay, after the movie, I'm here speaking with Fontaine Gaddy. Is that right? Okay, terrific. What did you think of the film?
Wonderful, and you got me so excited about helping you to restore this house.
Yes, well, the Rotary Club is sponsoring this project, so it's really exciting. What is your connection with Scotch Plains and the movie?
I lived in Scotch Plains for like 25 years, And I have 3 children who all went to the high school, swam for the Y, and lived here for, 25 years, very involved. So
Did you learn anything from the...
I learned a lot tonight from that movie. And I'm going to go back and look at some of the more historical homes that I've missed.
Me too. I grew up in Westfield, born and raised. I still live there now, and so much of that I had no idea. So I'll be doing the same thing. We'll probably be seeing each other, passing in the roads, looking at some of the homes, and it's very interesting. I enjoyed it.
I'm excited for you all. I really am. I think it's great that you're going to work on restoring it.
Okay, now I'm standing here with Rick Bousquet, and you are the president. Did I pronounce that right?
Right.
Okay, good. And you are the president of the Historical Society, and tell me more.
Scotch Plains and Fanwood. I'm the chairman of the Historic Review Commission of Scotch Plains. And now I sit on this board of the Betty Frazee House Incorporated. So
it's a wonderful project. Can you tell me a little bit more about it?
Well, the Historic Review Commission has been working to save the Betty Frazee House for 12 years. Long before I was the chairman, I was a member under many great chairs, and it's been in jeopardy, or even once some years back it was listed as on the 10 most endangered homes. So it's been a lifelong project, so to speak, of ours, and now with the help of the Rotary, it's coming into being.
That's terrific. And do you think that the film is going to help that?
Oh, absolutely. The film now, for once and for all, takes that legend that really only a select few people knew about, and it's going to bring it out in the open. And after this, I believe they're going to be running it on Channel 34 and Channel 35, and that's going to be, for all of the people that couldn't attend these premieres, many of our homebounds and senior citizens who remember the Terrys, so I think that this will be really our windfall.
That's terrific. I know I learned so much. I'm from the area, and I didn't know most of that, so it was very, very educational, very informative. So I'll be doing some more research now. It's piqued my interest. So.
Okay, I'm Rick Detwiller. I'm working as historical architect on the restoration.
Basically handling all the details of what goes on when the house is being restored.
Little drawings and things you see around here are based on drawings I did when I was a student at Columbia, and we got in there as Frank Terry was modernizing the house. But we managed to save the paneling that's down in the Cannonball House now, and a lot of the other pieces, and we have all the measurements of how it looked before he got through. And then he covered all the original woodwork and things with paneling, plywood. So it's still there. It's underneath a lot of it. So it's a great old house, and it's got the oven and things that can be restored, and it'll be as good as new if we can get hold of it.
And you have a connection to Scotch Plains. You grew up here, is that right?
I grew up on Clark's Lane, and as I said, I've followed the brook all the way to Terry Lou Zoo, and I've enjoyed that place ever since I was a little kid. It's a terrific place and a terrific cause, I think. And wrote the book on the Battle of the Short Hills, too, that's in the library. If you look for it, it's called War in the Countryside. And it tells about the sacrificing the sheep in the Westfield Meeting House.
Yeah, I didn't know about that either. Wow.
It's pretty gory and disgusting. And at the end, Washington actually sent 300 barrels of flour down to the poor sufferers at Ash Swamp and vicinity. So he took particular notice of their troubles.
So that slaughter was on the current site of the Presbyterian Church in Westfield?
Yeah, the old church was there, and it's been gone for years, but it actually was on that site. And they put a ram's head in the pulpit, and they actually herded 500 head of cattle back to their ships and took them with them. But so many of them had gorged themselves on this fresh meat and all the rum from the distillery and the applejack that a lot of them did die from heat stroke and other causes on the way.
Yeah, I learned a lot. It was really very informative.
It was a really a frenzy of drinking and eating because these guys had been cooped up for the whole winter, and this was supplying their expedition before they took off. They couldn't lure Washington out, so they just collected all the food they could get and drink, and then they took off and went to Philadelphia by sea. So it was a victory really to Washington in the short run. And the British, in the long run, they weren't able to smoke him out, which was what they were trying to do.
It's a great movie. I really enjoyed it.
It was wild, and they did such a great job on editing and putting it all together, and even the special effects at the end. And the ghost of Betty fading in and out was a special effect that I appreciated a lot, because they were very, very important people to the community, and it's nice to know that they're remembered.
Well, I appreciate the part that you're playing in this whole project. I hope everything goes well, and I wish you a lot of success and the Rotary Club. And thank you so much for speaking with us tonight, Rick. Thank you.
We're looking forward to working further on it, and hope people will come out and join us.
I recognize your voice, and you did the voice of Betty. Yes. Okay, great. Tell me a little bit about it.
It was a lot of fun. We have known Frank for a long time. I've actually known him since I was 19. So
she's only 23 now.
Right.
Very short time. A very short time.
He recruited us without any problem. When he said, "Would you?" and we said yes before you came out of his mouth.
So is this what both of you do for a living?
The show that's currently up right now is he directed and I'm in it, and I built the set. So yeah, not for a living, but for an avocation.
Yeah.
Gotcha. And you did the narrating, correct?
Yes, I did.
Lovely voice. I was thinking. I thought you sounded like you did that for a living. So.
Yeah, well, they took one look at me and said you have a face for voiceovers, and that's how I got the job.
So are you all from the area, and what's your connection here?
Yeah, I'm from Winfield.
I started in Maplewood. I'm now from Winfield.
Yeah, we like to live together.
Yeah.
Being married.
Being married and all? Okay.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about yourself.
I'm a cartoonist, do work for Mad Magazine and the Daily News, and was privileged to be and honored to be here tonight.
Did you enjoy the film?
It was. The nude scene was great, very tastefully handled. I loved how they worked in the song Still Frazee after all these years. It was just perfect, and it had that, I don't know, I thought I was the only one who knew about this. There's a historical thing that took place back in those days, and they showed it, the part where Bob Hope was entertaining the troops. I thought I was the only one who knew. So the CGI effects were even excellent. The girl looked like she was actually real. Better than King Kong.
You're right. It was a really good film, and now you're giving away all the best parts, so everyone's going to want to watch it.
At least I didn't say that Rosebud was really her sled. I'm sorry. Nuts. But at least she gets back to Kansas. Doggone. I'm sorry. It never happens. So, how you doing? Hey.
I'm doing well, thank you. What is your connection with this whole situation here?
I'm an old friend of Frank Thorne's and the family over there, and also with the narrators. So they, out of pity, said, please come and see the...
It's a whole entertainment family, so to speak, right?
Yeah, all the cartoonists in New Jersey stick together.
Tell me a little bit about yourself and your connection with this whole thing.
Well, I moved into the house that I'm in now, which is right across from the Frazee house in 1972. So I was barely out of adolescence, but have come to really appreciate the historical value of the area. And tonight's film really not only took in the Frazee house, but the Frazee house in the context of a larger historical picture. So I think that the way the committee is pursuing this, it's going to, once that DVD is released, it's going to contribute to a lot of high school and the citizenry to really appreciate history in a much more, unique way. And I'm very proud to be just an assistant here helping with the committee. We have some ideas for fundraising later on. I might say, I suggested to the committee that we have a photo contest. There's hardly anyone in Scotch Plains who has children or grandchildren or themselves who doesn't have a picture of themselves feeding the animals at the zoo. So what we want to do is have a photo contest. You'd have to probably submit $25 to go in, but my point is we would have judges, and the final 50 pictures would be almost sealed and preserved as a memorial to the Terrys. So we'd like to see that happen.
By day a politician, by night a lord. Well, you look fabulous. Look like you were just plucked right out of the era. You look fantastic. And you did a wonderful job in the film. Tell me a little bit about it.
Well, you know, I've done many things in artistry. Being the mayor, I did a little dancing with you just a little while back. I've now done theater. Skip Unger was here before. I don't know if you're aware. Lou and I did a little singing. So they call me a Renaissance man. No, this is a wonderful experience. This was the first time I saw the film tonight, and I'm absolutely floored at what they were able to do. So I'm really pleased as punch to be a part of it. I'm honored. Maybe lost a little dignity along the way. My kids might be embarrassed, but that's okay. That's okay. I'm just the thing that disappoints me is that we might have been a little bit late in the season to get entered into this year's Oscars. Because quite frankly, I think I could have given George Clooney a run for his money in the supporting role this year.
Absolutely, I think you're right.
But we're pleased that, and it gives us a nice sense of community, a nice sense of history about this area, and the municipal government is very enthusiastic about partnering with the Rotary Club to make this a success, and we have great visions for what can happen, not only at this house, but the surrounding property, and I think it'll be a treasured asset for many years to come.
I think you're right. It sounds like it's going to be amazing. It was such an education for me, too. Being from the area, I learned so much, so it was really great.
You know, it's anybody that's into history and is a history buff is like myself. This was just a phenomenal night, and like I said, this is the first time I saw the movie, and in my small part in it, you know, it took an entire afternoon, and you can imagine what it took to put something like this together, and I give John all the credit in the world. He's really a talented guy.
Yeah, so he's doing well. He's living in Brooklyn for a while, but he married it'll be 2 years in July.
All right, finally, an interview with the star of the movie. I'm speaking with Hope Weinstein, who played Aunt Betty in the movie. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
You did a great job. Can you tell me a little bit about what was involved?
Well, basically, there was an audition. It was just a little over a year ago, as a matter of fact, and they had a number of women who, Suburban News had advertised an audition, and my mom actually saw it in the paper and said, you have to come out for this, so I did. And there's an interesting coincidence that happened on the street that I grew up, on Nevada Street in Westfield. It was...
Which happens to be the street my husband grew up on. We were just discussing that.
So you'll definitely appreciate this. The street that I grew up on, I don't know about your husband's side of the street where he grew up, but on my side there was all woods. And then my parents had this house built where I grew up, and then at the end of that block was a house that was well over 100 years old at the time I was 2 years old. And between the two houses there was all woods, and it was called the Frazee Woods. And
I remember that. We were just discussing that prior to the film.
And I just recently heard that the house that was on the corner, the over 100-year-old house, was actually built by Aunt Betty's husband. So it's just, I don't know if this was all channeled or what, but, and I didn't know all this at the time, so it was just like amazing after the fact to find all this stuff out. So that to me is the most interesting aspect of this whole thing, to be honest with you.
That is wild. You know, this, like I keep saying, this has been such an education, and I've always known about the Frazee house over there because, you know, my husband's family has referred to it a number of times, and I was wondering if it was connected, and so that was part of my mission tonight, was to find out the connection between that and this film. So now I know.
Actually, behind my parents' house, I don't know if you ever knew, there was a cul-de-sac called Frazee Court. So apparently Frazees ran a little rampant in that area, so they weren't all in Scotch Plains. So
and the property seems to be large to begin with in Scotch Plains, so it's obviously they, like you said, they have a lot going on in this area at the time. So
right, I mean that's the irony of the whole thing, is that they've got all this land, and land in Union County is so hard to come by, and yet they haven't, nothing's been done with it yet. So I'm really hoping that, you know, the plan comes through. I think it's going to be really important to raise this money, because I think some really important things can be done with this property.
I agree. So how did you enjoy making the film, and what was that experience like?
I did. It was so much fun. It was a real creative process, and I never did any kind of film work before, and I never did a role. I'd done a lot of community theater and had a lot of lines and shows and stuff. This was the first non-speaking role I ever knew, and it was interesting to do film work, you know, with scenes being shot out of order and not always knowing exactly what the context is. And I'd be told, well, look concerned, or, you know, look elated. And so I kind of went with it, and it was just fun to see how it ended up. And I said, John, the director, really does know what he's doing, because he did really put it together. It was a really amazing experience, and it was kind of nice not having to worry about learning lines and being able to do something over if it didn't quite work out. And friends of mine had come to see it tonight, and they said, "Are you nervous about tonight?" And I said, "Not really, because what can I do?" So that was a nice feeling.
It's in the can, as they say, right?
So I have to try this again.
Now, I recognized you instantly when I saw you from the film. Tell me your name.
Alan Schaefer.
And you are the artist who was painting the rendition of Betty Frazee in the beginning of the film. Tell me a little bit about your involvement.
Frank Thorne is an old friend. I mean, from high school. And when he...
Not that old a friend.
That's pretty old. And when he asked me if I'd like to get involved with this, I said I had to say yes. You know, I really had to. And I'm so glad I did. It was a great, really great experience being part of this project. And I live here in Fanwood, so it's hometown stuff.
It has some significance for you. What was it like to, have you ever done anything like this? Any film work or anything? What was that like for you?
No, first time. Fun. It really was. It was enjoyable. It was fun. I had a great...
And you got a close-up, too.
Oh, yeah. I have the only close-up in the film.
That's good stuff.
No, I enjoyed it.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time out to speak to us tonight. You did a great job, and we really enjoyed the film. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.